All right, we are live on YouTube according to this meeting. Today is Thursday, January 30th. This is a weekly development meeting, which means we usually talk about active development tasks for Backdrop CMS. This week, we're going to do something a little bit different. Since next week is our strategy and goals for 2020 meeting for development, we've shortened up the active tasks list and instead added a section where we can prepare for next week's meeting. All right, so to start us off, I wanted to welcome Alejandro to the Backdrop community. He has ported both the Views Aggregator Plus module and the HMS Field module and has maintainer applications in the queue. Tim, I want to say thank you again for responding to him since I think Gregory's been really busy the last few weeks. I'm happy to take a look at his applications after this meeting and make sure he gets reviewed. We also have a new module that was released this week. The Protected Forms module has a stable release, which is great. And that this next section of our meeting is usually devoted to issue review, but I did want to say that we have a milestone for 115.1 that has a handful of things in them. It doesn't look like we have anything critical that needs to be fixed urgently. So I was going to recommend to Nate, he's not here today, that we do a push of the 115.0 release to Pantheon and other places if it's not there already. And then review those issues in the 115.1 queue for release sometime soon, next week or the week after would be my preference. And then Tim, if you and I can work on a newsletter, I can try and kick, I haven't used the new system yet, but I'll try and see if we can get something from our MailChimp newsletter into there as a starting point to put that stuff in. And so then I think 2 weeks is sort of reasonable to get that timeline out for that. The 116 release, which is scheduled for May 15th, has currently 4 issues that are tagged for the milestone. Our usual process for this is that everybody can go and take a look at the milestone candidate label in the queue and see if there's anything there you think really needs to be included in the next release. If you do, you can advocate for that issue. And if that issue gets an advocate, then all of those issues get submitted to the PMC for review. And then the PMC would decide if those are appropriate for our priorities or not. However, there is a discussion going on in the forum right now about having a better way to decide priorities than letting the most active people in our community decide what is most important for our community. So it could be that there are a whole bunch of people that are using Backdrop that need something that none of the people who are currently in the conversation are aware of. Or it could be that we're all missing something that we all know needs to happen, but for some reason isn't getting the attention that it deserves. So there's a great conversation going on in the forum about how we can try and better set the priorities for our project. And I would love feedback from anyone who has thoughts on it in that issue. Tim, thanks for opening it. Takwama, if you watch this, thank you for bringing that up. I know it's been something you've been championing for a while. So I think now's a great time to talk about it since we're about to set goals for 116. And it could be that we just decide on a process, but the process can't start until the 117 release, and that's also fine. I would love to improve the process, however we end up getting that done. So there's links in the agenda for the 115.1 milestone, which will be the next bug fix release, and the 116 milestone. And I think those are just issues that have rolled over from the 115 milestone. So they might get deemed no longer a priority by the PMC or replaced by something that are more of a priority based on our conversations in the forum. But it is a tentative list. All right, nice and short.
So I was unaware that the PMC was getting involved in issue, like the decision about issues that are being advocated for. Is that something new or?
So we generally had the PMC take a look at the issues that were assigned to the next milestone and say yay or nay. We've always had that happen. But usually the PMC is really busy. So it's like, hey, does anyone have any objections to this? And they look at the list and go, no, looks fine. Or actually, I don't think that's a priority or whatever. But for the most part, it's not like an active discussion about it, which I think maybe we might want to add. But yeah, so they have always been aware of what's going on in the next release and have a vote, yes, no, on the issue in the PMC queue. So that's something that we will do regardless of what our process is for 116. But yeah, it hasn't ever resulted in significant change thus far.
On the priority setting, I think it's worth drawing attention to the difference between sort of new features and bugs. And those might be different. And I kind of like the advocacy route as a way of determining priorities for new features. It's not perfect, but that still leaves a big gap in bugs. Like, how are we determining what are the most important bugs to fix as opposed to the easiest?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the entire discussion that's going on in the forum right now is about new features. It is hard to determine the priority of bugs in general. It seems like visibility of the bug is really important. Like, how often are people running into this problem, or is it something that's an extreme edge case might determine it. Usually if there's something that deletes data, that is always a critical bug. And I'm not aware of any of those that we have right now, but if there are, they should be marked as critical. And then any bug that has a pull request is assigned for the next milestone. So if that pull request gets marked RTBC, it'll get merged regardless of whether it's important or not, just because if we have a fix for a bug, we should include it. But yeah, it would be great if we could figure out a better system for adding priority on bug fixes. I don't know if anyone has any ideas on that. The first thing that comes to mind would be the way GitHub usually handles these things is you put it like a thumbs up on the top issue, but that assumes that everybody who's running into the issue is on GitHub. And that's not necessarily a match for what our community is doing. So yeah, it would be great if we had better ways to do that. Please add thoughts into the forum post if you have them. So next section in the agenda is to talk about what we're going to be doing next week. We just had a strategy meeting for what we want to achieve in design and usability improvements in 2020. I think the conversation about what we want to achieve with Backdrop the product is going to be a little different, but I don't know, Tim, if you wanted to outline what you envision happening next week or what what you hope will happen next week. Maybe we can help set up an outline for how to handle that.
I think at a minimum that we should do sort of how we started the last meeting, which is everybody ought to give a chance to sort of say, hey, here are the how I think we're doing and so far in handling sort of development issues and what kind of goals I think we should be thinking about this year. And so at the very minimum, we just leave the meeting with a list of what everybody that's participating. Probably we should have somebody also review the issue queue or the forum post and review it, you know, so if people post things there but aren't on the call, their ideas also get into the agenda. But beyond that, I'm still, as I expressed in the last meeting, I'm still a little bit conflicted in what an open source community like ours can do in terms of goal setting, right? It's like, there's this it's your own scratch mentality, which is everybody does what's important to them. And just setting a goal as a community, like what is the effect of that? How do we use that? I don't know.
Well, for example, in Drupal, there are, I think they're called initiatives. And that would be an idea, but I think it works only if there are people who make part of the initiative. So we could collect ideas for initiatives. And if, for example, minimum 2 people build a team and there's consensus that is an important goal, they just could start and do that. So it's maybe a bit similar to advocating for an issue, which is also most a small team. One person who is advocating and another person who's working on the feature. So maybe that, yeah, we could do this more official in, yeah, in the form of an initiative.
I think we have a chicken and egg problem with things like initiatives, in that we don't really have a core group of volunteers that's big enough to justify initiatives. On the other hand, if we had initiatives, we might get more volunteers because people might be more inclined to like get on a very narrow committee that meets at a different time, or right. So I mean, I think it might be time to try something like that, where in order to become an initiative, you have to have a minimum threshold of people interested.
Yeah.
I don't think we should just like limit. So I think I think we're talking about the same thing. Like an issue with an advocate and an initiative is the same thing. We just need to figure out like how to make it more attractive for somebody who's not participating in something to participate in something. So maybe we need to change the responsibilities for the advocate. So not only do you pester people to review your issue if it's not getting reviewed, or rewrite it if it needs a rewrite or whatever, but you can also be sort of the point person for people who are curious about this initiative to reach out and say like, hey, I also am interested in X. What can I do to be of help? And then the issue becomes less like, or, you know, here's the problem and here's a pull request, but it becomes bigger, more like an initiative, like we're going to improve the translation interface in Backdrop Core or something. And then it can have a bunch of sub issues that are all related to the initiative rather than just being one. And it can carry across more than one release. So it could even be a, what are these called? Project on GitHub, where you can sort of say, this is the number of things we have tagged with this project, and this is the number of things we're moving towards goal or what have you. I think it's the same concept. And I wouldn't want to limit something from being an initiative by the number of people who are working on it, because I think if we have one person working on an initiative as an advocate or whatever we want to call it, it can still make just as much progress. I've seen a bunch of core initiatives start that way in Drupal too. My question would be, how do we select those initiatives in the first place? Is that something that we just have people volunteer and say, I'm really passionate about X, and then we have the project management committee approve it the same way we do with issues that are scheduled for milestones? Or is it something we want to have more of an open conversation about in the forum? I think setting that initial decision of priority is something that I struggle with determining.
Sure. So, I mean, I think it either could be sort of a formal decision by like the PMC, but the other, I mean, the advocacy right is largely determined by somebody stepping forward. So I could envision a scenario where we had, like next week, we brainstorm initiatives. And I get your point about advocacy and initiatives being the same. I guess I just sort of see initiatives as being a little, you know, advocacy could be a really tight issue that really only needs one person. And I expect that initiative would be broader and cover multiple things, but it doesn't necessarily have to. But anyways, we could brainstorm a whole bunch of things, like here are things I lost you.
No, you're here. Are we here?
Damn it. Okay. Did you?
We can still hear you.
Okay. You might lose me at any point. That's why I turned off my video, to hopefully save a little bandwidth. Anyways, I could envision that we brainstorm them, and then like initiatives, just advocates do require 2 or 3 people to sort of become official. I mean, because you can always still advocate for an issue with a lower threshold, right? But if an initiative is a bigger thing, then we sort of make the decision-making process that, well, we need to get 3 people, right? If we can get 3 people, and I think an advantage to an initiative is the ability for 3 people that, again, can't meet at this time to like say, oh, we're going to start meeting on this issue and focusing on this issue, and they can pick their own time. And maybe we get people that can't come to these meetings but want to be involved. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not. The risk, the downside to this is we declare 5 initiatives and we get the same 5 people on all 5 initiatives, and we haven't really accomplished anything. But hopefully not.
Okay, so I'm trying to document differences between an individual issue advocate and an initiative advocate.
So, in my opinion, in initiative, so I'm not sure how it is in Drupal, but my impression is that an initiative is a more official goal of the project. So everyone can advocate for something, and if nothing happens there, it doesn't happen. But an initiative would be, for me, kind of a goal of the whole backdrop project, and so that also people, if they see it doesn't continue the initiative, they're asking if they can help, and so on. And it's more like the goals in the roadmap, in my opinion. I don't know.
I mean, that makes sense too. It's another way of thinking about it. Yep.
So, and if not, I think the differences are there are not many differences to advocating, and then it would make sense, in my opinion.
Okay, so in terms of setting goals for the project, is this something we should do in next week's meeting? Maybe we can think about it before then and set them, try and determine a list of a few things that we want to be initiatives for all of Backdrop, and then run that by the PMC. Is that the kind of thing? And then if those initiatives are big enough that they, aren't going to have a single issue with them, we could assign a person or people who are responsible for each initiative. And we could select an issue in each initiative for every milestone or something like that, to make sure that that initiative moves closer towards its goal. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't have to get done in the milestone, but having something where we're like, this is an initiative and we care about this, and so we're going to prioritize this issue might be good. I don't know if your silence is that you disagree with me. Just I'm brainstorming. Feel free to.
No, I hear you. I agree. I think my mind is jumping in different directions. Like, if we go this route, I mean, there has been discussion, I think, in the past in Backdrop about having like maintainers of different subsystems, but we just didn't have the number of volunteers to make that necessary. And I'm trying to think about what the difference between like a system maintainer would be and an initiative lead. And they might be kind of, it could be different, but they might also be very much the same. And I'm thinking about UX, or the UX stuff we just talked about. If we had a UX initiative or a UX lead, that would also help us with that problem about like breaking log jams and making decisions, right? If there were some people that we had given some authority over UX, right, to be the decision makers. And I'm wondering if, like, I'm also wondering is, would these initiatives be restricted to core, or could we as a community decide that more contrib themes is a priority, right? That one of the road or the big obstacles to getting a bigger usage is the lack of contrib themes. So let's have an initiative whose goal it is to get more contrib themes.
Yeah, I think I would agree that they should not be limited to core, and it should be more of what does Backdrop need as a whole.
And I think by declaring initiatives and maybe having a lead for each one, we're also, creating a decision-making structure, which right now kind of we're lacking, right? It's like the only way to get anything done is to build consensus around it amongst everybody. And having, some initiatives with some authority might be helpful, but I know that's a tough decision.
Yeah, no, I like that.
Okay, and one last point on this, which is, again, I feel like over the years there's been the chicken and egg, right? And that it's been hard to do something like initiatives because the community wasn't just big enough. And I'm not 100% sure we're there yet, but I think we're on the edge. And it might be it's just the right time to try it. And it could actually, the hope is that it brings new people in when they have more specific things to work on and or, more opportunity, more points of engagement, right? Because an initiative might meet every other week at a different time. And so.
Is there a minimum size or complexity of some task for an initiative, or could this be anything?
I mean, I think if it is limited to a single issue, then that would just be an issue advocate. But if it's something that I don't think there should be a limit in size. I think that if it's something that is important to Backdrop or the Backdrop community,
I meant
it's
more
something. What do you mean?
I meant more like a minimum issue. Minimums, like saying, I don't know, one bug fix is not
It's
an
not.
initiative,
Yeah.
obviously. But how small is too small?
I don't necessarily think we need to set any rules about that. Maybe we just look at all of the suggestions, and if something comes up that's small that we think is super important, it can still be an initiative.
All right.
Yes, but if it's small as one issue, I think with the existing tools, we can handle that with an issue advocate and for example, the image field for the last release that were exactly for the most of the time 2 people. So a small team, but it worked with just an issue advocating. And I think that's fine for one issue, even if it's a big issue. And other examples for initiatives would be for me, for example, translation interface or references in core, or some broader subjects.
I think references in core might also be something that would be small enough to be an issue and have an issue advocate, because it's a feature rather than an ongoing thing. So if I don't know, maybe it is, but I was thinking something like the new menu system, right? It started off as one issue and then we got it, and there's a whole bunch of spin-off issues that if it were an initiative, the same person who started the original issue would then have to follow up with all of the other little issues and have a team of people who are helping working on them or whatever. And it seems like that might not be necessary for the feature. We can just let those stand, and when someone gets around to solving them, they can be solved. And we have more important initiatives that might need to be solved than improving the help text on a radio button or whatever. I don't know what the issues are, but something like that. But I could see how something that was super important might start as one bug fix And in a conversation about it, we're like, well, this actually leads to an underlying problem of like, I don't know, making user interfaces that non-technical people can use. And maybe that becomes the initiative rather than fixing this one bug with this, node percent terminology that confuses everyone. There might be an underlying issue there that does deserve an initiative, even though the current task is only concrete, one narrowed down to one issue. But it also could be that our one issue right now is like, we're having a problem with a chat tool or whatever, but maybe there's an initiative behind that that's like, we need to choose better tools for free open source software projects. And so even though right now there's only one issue, if that's something that is initiative, then every release cycle will be like, hey, is there anything we need to do in terms of this particular initiative? Are we doing a good enough job with our tooling for our project or something like that? And it might keep us in line with continuing to ask questions that are important, even though we may not have an issue that directly maps to that problem. So I don't know.
I agree with all of that. I don't think we need to decide on the minimum size of an initiative, because if an initiative carries with it the weight of being an official endorsement of the PMC, then I think the PMC sort of decides what's big and small enough to be an initiative, right? It's not, there's no risk of something sort of some small issue accidentally becoming an initiative, because we'd actually have to have an affirmative decision on it, and they can decide, it could be a very small issue, it's just super important and worth becoming an initiative, but probably not. So I would think of it more that way. And but the reverse is true. We can't have the PMC just create an initiative with nobody behind it, right? So, I mean, I think it's less the size of the issue and more, is there somebody willing to take charge of it that's critical? Because if the PMC says, oh, we're going to do an initiative on search because people keep telling us we need better search, but there's nobody currently motivated to take on that initiative, then the initiative becomes pointless.
Yeah. I do think it might be a good idea, though, to get documented somewhere the things that PMC members think should be initiatives. So something like search is a good example where it's like, we know this is a problem. We would love it if somebody wanted to step up and own this initiative, but right now it's not active because there isn't anyone to do that. And that way, I think also creates a space for people who want to be more involved but don't know where they can help, to look at that list and go, oh, I also really care about search. And then all of a sudden feel like there's a good place for them to step in. So I would say that in our brainstorming next week, it would be good to throw all of these, like all of our ideas into the pot and see what comes out as being a priority for the project. And of those, if we have people who are willing to step up to the initiatives, we should note that, like, there are people who want to own these 4 initiatives and be like, perfect, those are our first 4 initiatives. But we also feel like these 5 things are important and we can put them in the list of things that are priorities for Backdrop, though not actively getting worked on. I think both of those are valuable to know.
So we could decide at this meeting that the agenda for the next week's meeting is to come up with proposed initiative ideas. But this whole concept of initiatives, well, nobody else has endorsed this yet. So I don't know. I'm just wondering how that works. I mean, we could just throw that out as, I guess, as this is our proposal, is that there be this new initiative kind of status, and that our goal next week is to nominate, 8 or 10 possible initiatives that the PMC then decides on. And if people don't like the initiative thing, I guess then we just abandon that and do something else.
Okay, I'm getting behind this initiatives idea. I like it.
I am too. I mean, I felt for a while that we need to evolve structurally, or sort of, and I want to say just from an organization point of view, I think having some sort of a committee structure, which is what I view this initiatives, allows for a little bit more of innovation just in terms of how we communicate and how we organize ourselves, because some of us might prefer to meet in Zoom meetings, but others prefer to. And so now, smaller groups can kind of choose the way that they choose to work together and experiment. And it might be that some people join the group not because of the topic, but just because of the way they like that group, the way that group interacts. Also it gives people the opportunity to sort of recruit for their specific initiative. I don't know. I like it. I think there's some possibility there.
I like that.
Joseph, what do you think?
I guess all this sounds fine. I'm kind of imagining the initiatives being very similar to the advocacy thing we have now, except that you can have more than one advocate on a much larger meta issue, or basically putting an official structure around that.
I also think like getting it highlighted in a roadmap on the roadmap page or a separate initiative page or something will help with our sort of core values statement too, where it's like, these are the things that are important to Backdrop and that will continue to get attention beyond a single release. So something like solving this one issue we're working on right now is good for like, hey, this issue has an advocate and this is what we're doing today. But something like we're going to continue to improve, affordability forever is a bigger statement. And I think getting initiatives on that, like we're going to care about this forever list is also really important. Not forever, but until we decide otherwise, will help people sort of see what the vision is for the project as a whole, which I like.
Yeah, and then another thing could be, it was already mentioned, I guess, infrastructure. So we could think more precisely about that. For example, in Gitter or Zulip to have a separate channel for the topic, like we have now for localization, for example. So that when people arrive there, they see, oh, here's a search group, and I can join them if I'm interested, and so on. So, and maybe the project functionality, which you mentioned in GitHub. So I think we should collect some of these ideas and then, document them somewhere. So then when people start with an initiative, they know their tools and the places where to meet and so on.
I like that.
How often is the roadmap on the website updated?
It's supposed to be updated after every release. So as soon as we know what's coming, so it gets updated when we know what's in the release. So it should have been updated on January 1st. And then it'll get updated again as soon as we have a plan for the next release. So after the next meeting, when the PMC gets to vote on the next issues, will get updated again. So I think our roadmap thus far has been very focused on like what new features are coming, but I would also love to see a higher level thing of like, what is our vision for things that are important to Backdrop 2? But it should get updated twice a release cycle, twice a minor.
It says the current version is 1.14.
Wow, then it did not get, well, that's because it hasn't gotten updated for the post-release version, but you're right, it should say 1.15.
Yeah, I think having a regularly updated roadmap that has like some kind of short-term features that we're working on and then some more long-term things would help when people are like evaluating, should they use, like, is the project active?
Yeah.
Seeing that that's there might help with that.
Yeah.
So in the spirit of brainstorming, and I don't know how this meshes with the initiative discussion, but something else that we could do at like the dev planning meeting is to just brainstorm a long list of like priorities that we have, set goals for the year. Like, here are things we'd like to see. We have 3 releases. Here are things we'd like to see happen over the next 3 releases, right? And that, in a sense, we're generating a list of possible issues for people to advocate for. But it's looking a little further out than most. It sounds like our roadmap is mostly right now one release out. Like, here's what we're planning for the next release. And so it could be like, what are the features we want to have within the next year? And I don't know. I could even envision where we had a 1-3 and or a 1 release, a 1 year and a 5 year, or a 3 year. Maybe 5 years too far, but a 3 year roadmap. These are things we'd like to. And it's aspirational, right? There's no promise, but I don't know how, the further out, the less practical it seems, but I think definitely looking at your route seems useful.
I think that's good. And we don't even have to have like specific features noted for like a 3 or 5 year thing, and just be like, these are the things we want to improve, and just be like concepts like translation.
Right. Or certain.
Yeah. And that would be fine. Speed, portability, I don't know. But yeah, I like it. And I also think that this fits with, we have an open issue for back-to-CMS.org to clean up the roadmap page because it's getting really long. And I think this makes a lot of sense for changing the roadmap page to be like, what's coming now, what's in the next year, and what's long-term, and then have like this all be buried in a subpage that's like features included in all previous releases or whatever. And that way the roadmap is more of a roadmap, and all of these details from the past can get put elsewhere. All right, we are nearing the end of our time. Is there anything else in particular we want to add for what we want to achieve in our meeting for next week?
Where should we put ideas for initiatives?
Right now, if you want to dump them into today's agenda, I have a little section there that just says ideas for initiatives. I'm going to copy this into next week's agenda, and then when this meeting's over, and then we can put them in there, and that way they won't get lost. And I can post a link when that's up into the Gitter. Or Zulip if I can get logged in there. Which I keep meaning to try.
It's cool. It's a little confusing at first, but because it like it like has multiple views, because it'll like some views it'll everything chronologically, but then you can also split a topic, and basically everything is a reply to something else. So I don't know.
So I don't know if you noticed, but I got lost and I'm back.
Welcome back.
Well, one thing I missed what Joseph, what you were just saying. So if I'm going in a tangent, that's why. But on the roadmap, I mean, I want to stress though that if we do have like aspirational goals, they're pointless if we don't occasionally review them, right? Like we should each quarter like stop and say, how did we do this quarter, or this release on this goal? At the very minimum. So.
Yeah, I think that's good. It's something I think that we can put in with the PMC issue. That's like, here's what we're doing next issue. We can be like, here are the stated goals. Here's what we did this issue. Here's what we want to do next issue. Are we still on track? Yes, no. And maybe there will be something that's like, hey, we haven't done anything on core search improvement in a while. Can we find someone to advocate for an issue for that for the next release or something? And it might steer us back to the things that we said were important that we might not be working on. And also might be like, oh, that's not important anymore. We take it off. So yeah, I think reviewing makes a lot of sense, and we should do it with every release, minor release.
Okay, good.
All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap up this meeting unless anyone has anything else you want to add in the general discussion open Q&A section. And if not, we will... Oh, go ahead.
So a hot topic on development right now in the issue queue. Jen, you and I were going back and forth on the other day, and I'm just wondering if there's any outstanding questions that we could talk about. That one about the states, right? The published states.
Oh, yeah.
Did we feel like we made some progress there? Would it be helpful to chat about it for a few minutes? Or,
Sure.
I mean, I'm fine with the way the discussion's going. I just had some ideas was all.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that issue in the last few days. I'm sure there's been more progress there. But yeah, so we're trying, for those of you who aren't following along, this is one of the issues that was in the 115 milestone and got bumped because the user interface was confusing. And so what I'm noticing in testing is that maybe the reason the user interface is confusing is because different people are expecting it to do different things. The issue here is that I think there is a problem that needs to be solved that is currently impossible to solve. And what we're trying to do is change core to make it possible to solve, but not entirely solve it in core. And so we have to release a user interface that makes sense for what is in core and allow Contrib to do the rest. And so Tim, I don't know if you are more up to date on this than where I am, but last I read, we were really confused about what to call the revision of a piece of content that is currently viewed when you look at the page, whether the page is published or not.
Yes.
What's the issue number for this?
It's in the 116 milestone. Let me see. I'm gonna pull it up quick. It is better workflow states and content saves option, issue number 1475.
Okay, thank you.
Right. You're right. The difference you and I were having is the way you're defining the problem, like, is I don't understand where you would have like an I don't understand why you would have an active revision that isn't published or the most current, right? To me, it's like by default, if it's the active version, it's the most recent if it's not published. And so the only thing I need to know is whether it's published or not. But you seem to see that differently, and that's...
Wait, can you say that again?
That I don't know what the use case, well, okay.
For having...
Like, you know, in like a workbench type workflow, maybe
right.
There's use case for this. But like in our current situation, I don't know when you would ever have an active issue that isn't either published or it's just the most recently revised. And by default, the way the system currently works, every time you edit something, it becomes the most recently edited. You can't edit an old version.
Right.
And that doesn't make sense that you would, right? It's like, by definition, if you edit an old version, you make a new version. And so the most current, the active version is the last one you edited.
So I'm not sure what you mean by active, because I think I was confused about that in the issue too. But the use case that I am worried about is I have like a very complicated about page that needs to go by my legal team. And somebody has decided to rewrite like 3 paragraphs of it. So we have a revision that is new and unpublished. That's not the right word. New and not yet visible. The old version is still visible. That's under review by the legal team. But the current version that is visible has a bug that needs to be fixed, like a typo. And so I need to be able to edit the current page. And if that means edit the old revision becomes actually clone it and make a newer revision, that's fine. We just need to communicate that in some way. And then we still have the older version that is under review, not yet visible, but going to be the next version. But now we have a newer version that is about to be replaced. And so just having some way to communicate that process in the user interface is really confusing. So we need to be able to edit older ones and newer ones. And I'm not sure if that edit process is just a copy, like is always just a copy, that's fine. But then we need to change the user interface on that form so that there isn't like a publish unpublished checkbox, or it just needs a little tweaking so that the interface that we have now that sort of always assumes only one thing matches our like multiple things workflow.
I think where I get tripped up on contributing to an issue like this is that I don't see. I would argue that the workflow you're talking about, like we want that to be possible, but that it might be a core module or a contrib module that's actually going to implement that workflow. So,
but it's already there, I think. And so I don't want to build a user interface that's lying to people about what's actually happening.
So
that's the thing that I'm stuck on, is like some way to actively communicate what's going on, right. Not necessarily how to add the feature.
Okay, and that might reinforce my point, which is what confuses me, right? Because to the extent that we're trying to communicate something that's describing what's happening behind the scenes, but isn't necessarily being implemented in the UI yet because it's just too complicated, that's when I start getting, it's like I'm totally focused on the current use, what the current user is going to be able to do.
Yeah.
Not what the underlying capacity is. And so some of the feedback I'm giving might be totally missing that point.
Yeah.
That there's this underlying capacity which we're trying to build out.
Yeah, I think so. I need to look at it again, and I want to test the pull request again. But my experience the last time I tested it was that the user interface made me think the system was doing something very different from what it was actually doing, because the user interface matched what it did before, but now there's this new functionality that it's doing instead. And so I was trying to figure out how to change the user interface to map to what is actually happening. And if we need to change what's happening to match what happened before, and that might be a more complicated change than what's there currently. So I'm not entirely sure where things stand right now, because I haven't checked on it in the last few days and I haven't tested it recently. But I remember being very confused about the publish options on the node form because they didn't match to what I was seeing visually. And the revision workflow edit button was really confusing because it kept creating newer ones and I still had the ability to edit older ones. And it's just how to change the active one didn't seem the same.
Does there need to be a separate page to manage revisions?
Well, there might need to be a separate issue to improve that interface or change the interface to match what's happening now. But I don't know. I mean, I want to try it again and refresh myself with everything. But I remember just being very confused because I thought I knew what was happening. And then when I clicked all the buttons, nothing that I thought happened. And part of it, I think, was just like the word published. And then also we have the ability in core to schedule future revisions, but we're not enabling that. That's something we're going to leave to contrib. So having that schedule button there also was really confusing because how do you indicate, on one form, there's a button that lets you schedule, but on the other ones there isn't. It was just trying to figure out how to make sense of all of the features that exist that don't apply. So yeah, I don't know. I want to try it again though and refresh my memory because I haven't looked at it in a few days and it's hard to talk about it in theory.
In my opinion, it's quite confusing because the issue description is about totally other things than than the development of the last months. And so Doc Wilmot is explaining what he's trying to do as of 20th October. But actually, he says he's only doing all this stuff to prepare a backdrop for idea of Clonos to have a recycle bin instead of only be able to delete content.
Hmm.
And so that's quite an indirect goal. And he's also asking you, for example, if we need that in core, because there are these contrib modules like workflow in Drupal, and we could use them, port them, to have all this functionality in a very good tested way. And I'm also not sure if we need all that stuff in Coral just to have a recycle bin, and we don't have it with that PR. That's only the preparation, and there's such a mess. I don't know how it's technically, but conceptually, it's not very clear to me, the goal of this
maybe we need
issue.
to start over with a new issue, not like start over the code, but a new issue, a new title and a new summary of exactly what this is doing, and just tie the pull request to this issue instead and say this is exactly what's going on. Because I think you're right, we have changed the focus a lot of times, where initially it was a very big issue, and then we're like, oh, well, let's just do this little bit, and now the little bit has changed a lot. What their initial little bit was. So that might be a good place to start, would just be to like restate, and then maybe people, when they visit that issue and read it top to bottom, it'll make a lot more sense what we're supposed to see in the pull request and what we're not supposed to see, and what the expected behavior should be. So that's a good idea. In my understanding, and again, I want to try it again, the things like in Contrib, the core workflow workbench solutions were really clunky because of a problem in core. And so this pull request is supposed to fix that problem in core. But the problem is fixing it in core might also allow for trash bins. I wasn't even thinking about that as part of it, but it presents some user interface issues that I think we're running into now. So I would love to see an updated summary. I'll redo the whole current issue now. Maybe I can work on an updated summary, and then I can have Dr. let me know if I got it right or not. Yeah, just to see. But that's a good idea, just so that we know what's going on.
That sounds like a good plan, because I'd be hesitant to contribute any more feedback to this issue, just because I've sort of so lost faith that I understand what the goal is, right? I was basically expressing an opinion about how it would be useful to me, but that might be completely missing the point of what it's trying to happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I might be doing the same thing, because I'm bringing my experience of using these Drupal 6 and Drupal 7 workbench workflow tools to the interface we have now, and it might not be applicable yet. So, yeah.
Sounds like we have an initiative.
Okay.
That's all.
That was a good brain bender. Thank you. I'm going to go reread that issue. Anything else we should talk about today? No. Yes.
No. Okay. Wait. I'm going to do this because Joseph's on the call, and I just want quick feedback, because nobody's given me feedback yet. And that guy that was having problems with his CSS about a week ago, it occurred to me, I ran into it after sort of giving him a hard time eventually, after trying to help him and then getting frustrated. I ran into a situation where, Joseph, I don't know if you've seen this issue yet. I changed my CSS, right? And I went in, I could see that my CSS was changed, and I refreshed the cache, and I did everything I could, and it was still not getting read by the browser. And I eventually realized it's because I was using the color module, and the color module is rewriting that CSS into a new file, and I just had to rebuild the color module, or resave my theme, and then it would and I feel like that's most of us don't ever use the color module. And so we never have to do this. And I'm only using the color module because I'm trying to figure out ways for people like this guy to do what he needs to do. And I think
so. Do I need to regenerate those files? Whenever caches are cleared, regenerate the files just in case they do something?
Yeah, I would do it on the complete cache clear and on the CSS JS aggregation clear task also.
Okay. Well, I'm glad I brought that up.
Register rebuild task too, in case any stuff is added.
Nobody had replied to that. Good. Okay. I wasn't sure if it'd be easy, or I wasn't even sure if it was something we should be worried about, but I feel like it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, because a while back, I did a thing where I kind of segmented, I compartmentalized a bunch of the code so that we could automatically regenerate those on config imports. And I think I could just do the exact same thing on cache clear.
Yeah.
Okay,
That'd be great.
that would be great. Yeah, and that might have solved that guy's problem. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know if he was using the color module.
I don't either, but it just occurred to me that that would explain why he was having such a hard time. And also, it's like totally. I mean, I'm still getting tripped up by it, right? You'd never expect a new user to think of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
kind of a problem I have with giving feedback about things, is because I've been doing Drupal development for so long, and I have so much knowledge about how it works at a core level
Mhm.
that everything just makes sense to me. And
Of course it does that.
yeah,
It's always done it that way.
and it's like I'm a little hesitant to go give feedback about the workflow thing because I work on a website that uses the workflow module in Drupal 7 and has over 800 workflow states.
Okay.
Wow.
So it's like,
Maybe we need
am
your
I the right person to give feedback on this?
Yes.
And it's, yeah, I don't know. Like that's really like 95% or more of the work I do is on Drupal 7 sites like that. They're just like doing weird things. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Any other feedback you need on any urgent issues, Tim?
No,
Okay.
sorry. I'll just stop.
No, that's all right. It's good. If we're here, it's a good opportunity. All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and end the weekly meeting.